In talking with heat stroke, if you really want to know the most about heat stroke, you should consult your veterinarian. In our kennel, we've had a lot of practical experience over the years. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article on heat stroke that you can find here on Canine Contenders. And I've interviewed a lot of veterinarians, and even though I didn't go to veterinary school, I have become somewhat knowledgeable of the subject. So be happy to share with you today what I know. And I can tell you a whole lot, first of all, about when it's going to occur, how to recognize it, how to avoid it, and what you need to do to treat it. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about hypothermic episodes, or as it's more commonly called, heat stroke. During this, you're going to hear me using 2 or 3 terms. We're going to talk about hypothermia, hyperthermia, and heat stroke. And basically, the 3 terms mean this. Hypothermia is when the dog's body temperature is way below normal. Hyperthermia is overheating of the dog. And a dog can become hyperthermic without having a full-blown heat stroke. If the dog's temperature, core body temperature, raises above the normal level, then that dog is hyperthermic. But it doesn't mean that he suffered from a heat stroke. And then last of all, there's heat stroke. And that's an episode where the dog's body becomes so hyperthermic that normal function is no longer possible. Sometimes recovery occurs from a heat stroke naturally, but most of the time veterinary attention is required, and at least the dog should be monitored. So let's talk a little bit about this phenomenon, heat stroke. It's November and we're out here today, and even though today's November the 8th, it's still going to be almost 80 degrees here in Tennessee today. So heat stroke is something that we have to be careful of and have to watch out for, from as early as March up until this part of the year. Even on a day like today, a dog can overheat and get in trouble, but particularly, in August, September, when you've got duck season just around the corner and you're getting your dog out and starting to get him ready for duck season, and he's been in the living room on the couch all summer long in the air conditioning. One of the things that you really have to be careful of is to make sure that that dog doesn't overheat. Hyperthermia is probably one of the leading killers of dogs in the southern United States. As a matter of fact, a couple of veterinarians have told me that snake bite and overheating or heat stroke run neck and neck in most areas of the country. In areas where they have a lot of poisonous snakes, it might be just a little bit more in the snake's favor, but right here in West Tennessee, my vet says that he sees more deaths every summer because of heat stroke than anything else, followed by snake bite. So let's talk a little bit about hyperthermia, or heat stroke as it's more commonly called. A dog's core body temperature runs a little higher than an adult human's. Most of the time we take our dog's temperature rectally, and a dog's normal body temperature through a rectal reading ought to be somewhere around 101 to 102.5, that general range. So it's going to run a little bit higher than a human's. A lot of people take their dog's temperature and it's 102.1 and they're, oh no, my dog's got a fever. Well, that's not so. Their metabolism is different, and as such, their body temperature also runs a little higher. Where you start running into danger is when you get on up above in that 104, 105 degree area, particularly if it's there for a sustained period of time. And when it really gets dangerous is when you see dogs 106, 107. I've seen dogs in the middle of a heat stroke with temperature as high as 109 that made a recovery. But that's very, very dangerous stuff. And, there are several ways that you can work to prevent a dog from having heat stroke. First of all, you don't want to run your dog in the hottest part of the day if you can avoid it, particularly in the early summer, midsummer, and early fall months. Today the high temperature is going to be up around 80. We've got a good breeze. We've got plenty of water with us. We can pretty much run all day long today, but say today it was supposed to be 90 and humid. We wouldn't even think about running, from noon until 5 or 6 in the afternoon because it's just too hot. There's no need for it. When the temperature starts rising above about 80, 85 degrees, it's time to take a look at altering the way that you train, particularly if you're in a humid environment. Obviously, we want to run early, we want to run late, we want to run in the cool of the day. We also want to keep a really good eye on our dog, make sure that we have plenty of fluids on hand. Every morning before we go to the field when it's warm, we stop and we throw a couple of bags of ice in the cooler, so we've got a way to take countermeasures very rapidly out in the field should our dog show signs of overheating. You know, you want to, during that time of year, make sure that you're putting out realistic setups. You don't want to be running your dog through cover that's, 2.5, 3 feet tall when the temperature is going to be 95 and the relative humidity is going to be off the charts, because the moisture and the heat are really going to hold in that heavy grass, and there's no way that the dog can cool himself off in that situation. So, you want to keep your training sessions short. You want to make them realistic. You want to run them in cover that's not going to restrict them. And you also need to keep in mind how that dog cools. Unlike you and I, a dog doesn't cool from sweating. Our dogs, they don't perspire. As a matter of fact, the only place that they sweat, they lose moisture through their nose and through their pads. But mainly they give up moisture and they give up heat through respiration. We can't hyperventilate successfully. You try hyperventilating and you try panting, and eventually you're going to get lightheaded and you're going to pass out. But a dog's different. Their respiratory system is made so that they can pant. And the panting mechanism is the way that they give off heat. They breathe out hot, warm air, and then they take back in, hopefully, cooler air. And that air exchange helps the dog give off heat. So you want to watch your dog and make sure it's not panting too hard. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize this, but a dog that's truly in a state of hyperthermia a lot of times won't be able to pant at all. He'll have reached the point where his breathing will have become very, very deep. He'll breathe with a very wide open mouth, and it'll be deep, labored breaths. And that's one of your warning signs that a heat stroke is imminent. When they're really gasping hard for air and they can't effectively pant, it's time to take that dog and do whatever you've got to do to cool him down. Another sign of heat stroke is lack of focus. Dog comes back and he's just ran a couple of big long marks, and you're trying to line him up on that third bird of the triple, and he doesn't seem to focus. He's a little bit wobbly. He has a funny gait upon the return from that next bird. Hey, it's time to cool that dog down. His body's telling him, look, we're having a tough time going. And really good dogs, a lot of times they have so much heart that they don't recognize the signals that their body's giving them. So they're going to keep on pushing themselves. They're going to keep on going. It's up to us as the handler to watch that dog and read that dog. And another thing that, compounds to heat stroke is the fact that since his only way to give off heat is through respiration, that dog's coming back with a retrieving dummy or with a bird in his mouth. His heat escape route, the respiratory route, it's blocked off by that. So a lot of times when that dog's coming back with the dummy or the bird in his mouth, he's not able to give off heat because that pathway for the heat escape is blocked, and he will continue to warm up. Another contributing factor to heat stroke, obviously, is pressure. We all act differently under pressure, but most of us tend to heat up. That's why they've got those commercials for antiperspirants that say, hey, don't let them see you sweat, because the natural physiologic response to pressure is for our core body temperature to rise. And the same thing is true for a dog. So if you're out there running on a hot day and your dog's not doing what you want him to do, you're trying to work with him, you're trying to give him fair, effective corrections, you've got to realize that that's also going to increase his stress level, and that's going to drive up his body temperature. Probably more trainers have negligently lost their dogs to heat stroke in training because they didn't know when to turn off the pressure than for any other reason. On several occasions, unfortunately, throughout my career as a trainer, I've watched other guys push their dogs too far. And I've even done it myself a time or two, so I'll admit it, I've been guilty of it. I think that we all have at one time or another. But, we've all seen guys go out there and the dog knows better and it's not giving him the cast he wants, so he's giving corrections, and things start to go downhill. And what a lot of times people don't realize happens is that that dog gets to a point where he can't succeed. Maybe you're trying to cast the dog back across the ditch and he's not taking the cast. So you stop him, you give him an indirect pressure correction with the collar, and you cast him again. Well, he fights you a little bit. After 2 or 3 corrections, he's starting to heat up. But remember, one of the signs of a heat stroke is a lack of focus. So now, even if the dog wants to give you the cast, he's heated up, his thinking's not clear, and he can't focus and do what you need him to do. So what happens there? Well, if a trainer's not careful, he'll become frustrated, and instead of recognizing that his dog is on the edge of overheating and that he needs to pick him up, instead he'll keep turning the pressure up because, by golly, that dog's going to do what I tell him to do. And that's a real recipe for disaster. So pressure is one of the leading causes of heat stroke, and it's something you've got to be very, very careful of on a very hot day. You know, to recap, to help avoid it, we want to make our setups realistic. We don't want to run the dog too long or too far. We want to make sure we're not running in the heat of the day, and we want to avoid pressure as much as possible and recognizing the dog when it's time to cut it off, to end the session, to put him under the air conditioning, or to do whatever you've got to do to cool him down.